Do you know what your organisation's constitution is? And how does your team reflect on those on a regular basis? I've been thinking about it quite a lot this past week, and I'll be talking about it a little bit more in the learning section. But in the meantime, in a change of scenery, I am now sat on the Thames in Windsor, reflecting on the past week of Petals in the 7th Petals Weekly. This is the 7th Petals Weekly with me, Si Jobley, talking about all good things Petals that's been going on over the past week. As I've said in the introduction, I've been away this weekend, so I've been working in a co-working space today, and I'm using the opportunity to kind of just reflect, capture some thoughts, and record in a quiet space where I could find one. Before we get into the weeds, let's do those scores. Productivity 2, enjoyment 3, teamwork 4, learning 4, serenity 4, which brings an average of 3.4, which is down 0.2 from last week. Let me explain as to why. So productivity took the typical mid-sprint dip last week, and to be honest, not sure how it's going to match the 5 from the previous week. So that's probably region highs. How do you sustain that? However, things have been ticking away, and as you can see from the other scores, things have been holding quite steady across the board. I had a lot of good teamwork going on this week. I sat down with Brian, one of my developers, who has managed to integrate Google Looker into our data set, so we get some better, more interesting metrics off the back of it. And this aligned quite nicely with the OKRs that I was talking about previous week. But we're setting out some key metrics that I want to look for this year and this quarter. And now we've got the data analysis tool available. It's much easier to know how we're doing on those. So when I'll be feeling more comfortable sharing that stuff, I don't think we're there yet, but eventually I would love to start using this in the weeklies to explain what's been going on with Petals and open it up a bit more in the good old nature of open source and being out there. Looking back at the OKR plan on a page that I talked about last week, it's not been going very well, as you can probably tell, because of lack of productivity. I've been chipping away at my Petals dev time in the evenings, but things haven't been quite as productive as I'd hoped. Another thought I did have with one of the other guys in the team, with Adrian, was the idea of what about the long-term goals? What about the other OKRs that might be tied to the project? So for now, we're looking at Q1. What do we look at Q2, 3, and 4? Should they be on the back of the page? So, you've got an easy reference point to that as well. And maybe you think about the vision of the project and the organisation as a whole, something we will talk a little bit more about later. I did set up the newsletter again in Brevo, which we use for all our email providing. We use that with the app for the live emails, but they've also got campaigns built in. So I've been using that to get the newsletter going again, referencing the weekly content that we're doing here. I'm trying to work out the right cadence. I'm going to do a couple of weeks on a weekly cadence to see if that actually engages. If not, then I might reduce it down to fortnightly or monthly to be less annoying for those people that are following along. I'll also be reaching out and saying, what is it you want to know as well? Obviously, you sign up for the app or the newsletter. I don't know. I'm not going to make any assumptions, but if there are things that they're not getting, then I want to find out and try to address that. I'm back on last week's goal, which was the Shout CN component library for the building the web app out. I did have a look at it. It wasn't like I didn't look at all, but it was a lot more complicated than I anticipated. So I need to do a bit more teamwork. Based on what happened this week, we got some good stuff out of doing some teamwork and a bit of random sort of ad hoc calls to look at stuff. That I want to try and do the same again with that component library. But that being said, it is the half-term week in the UK, which means a lot of parents are struggling for childcare, and that might also impact what's going on. It's always worth thinking about what outside forces have got in your place and how that can impact your serenity or your productivity. Something I definitely talk about when I'm bringing Petals conversations in retrospectives, for example, what's going on in your world, not just at work, but also at home. It's a great conversation starter, and it's really useful to pull out some of those really behind the scenes thoughts that people are scared to share. So this week's learning. I was listening to a blog about Chris Edmonds, the culture engine, over the weekend. And it got me thinking a bit more about organisation constitutions or culture codes or whatever you want to use. These are things where you generally, as an organisation, think about what is it we are trying to achieve, what's our long-term vision and goal, and how do we want to go about doing that? A lot of organisations talk about this stuff. I think a couple of organisations I've worked in recently, they've got these sort of things in place as well. So it's generally like, how do we want to interact with each other? What is our raison d'etre? How are we going to satisfy and work with our customers? How can we be better selves? So there's a lot of sort of behavioural kind of approaches that you want to kind of standardise or make sure people are being held accountable to, but it's generally for the greater good. Google used to say, don't do evil. Obviously that went to pot. But these are sort of angles that you want to think about as a team or as an organisation, whatever level you're talking about PETALS, think about how are we going to interact with each other. We've been thinking about this as a PETALS project recently. Like, what is the long-term goal? I've used the phrase growing team health together as a sort of a first draft, which I kind of like. This is kind of focusing on what we do talk about, team health, how we can improve it, grow, but also with that kind of language around nature and petals and flowers. And it's doing it together as a collective. So that's why I like growing team health together as our sort of long-term vision. But then as a behaviour, we want to make sure that we are collaborating. Always collaborate if you think it will get better results, or make sure you're constantly learning. I know, for example, Rightmove reference them as hows, the general behaviours as we want to work as an organisation. And ASOS also had a very similar concept in place. You can Google this stuff. I'll put some examples in the show notes to find out what good examples look like. But bring it down to the team level. What are your behaviours you want to standardise across the team? What kind of concepts and mindsets do you want to plant in your team members? And how can you help each other do that? These are really interesting conversation starters and might even warrant a proper retrospective, just focused on this as a whole. You can have your PETALS snapshot at the start of the retrospective, spend 5-10 minutes talking about the team as a whole, and then dive into some of the behaviours that you want to kind of drive towards as a team. Spend the hour brainstorming, refining, voting, however you want to play it, and then document it into a charter that would sort of identify what all these things it should be. You can publish it, you can print it, you can handwrite it, however you want to do this. But then you've always got a reference point as a team or organisation on all these behaviours that you want to kind of align to as a culture code or as a charter or as a manifesto. These words are thrown around a lot within the software engineering community, but you want to find the right language that you want to use in that sense. I'm not a big fan of constitution. It feels very formal and very sort of political in a way. Well, think about who you are and what sort of organisation you are, what kind of language you want to use while you're publishing and thinking about these things. So that is this week's weekly. Plenty for you to think about, hopefully. Some exercises you can hopefully often do with your team members or think about as a leader. And definitely let me know what you come up with. I'll put some more examples out there on the show notes so you can have a reference point to these things as well. And hopefully your team will be a better place to behave well together, bring in the best out of each other, and you're growing all together. Get in touch if you are doing this stuff. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. And if you want to join me for a conversation on a weekly, absolutely welcome. Could just be a very quick video call. We'd pull out as a snapshot. And I'll be back next week with more reflections on all these petals and what you can do to grow team health with your team.